The first LVT AS reached the beaches at 08:28, 2 minutes ahead of schedule. Despite the intense shore bombardment, Japanese mortars and artillery opened up, and 9 of the 3rd Marine Division's LVT AS and LVTs were knocked out. 7175, the 3rd Marine Division's beaches were enfiladed from what the Marines called the Devil's Horns of Adelip Point and Assup Point. The 3rd Marines landed on Red Beaches 1 and 2. The regimental commander, Colonel William C. Hall, hoped to overrun the Japanese positions overlooking the beach before they had a chance to recover from the preliminary bombardment. This hope soon vanished. On the left, the view of the beaches from Adelip Point was obstructed by Chinito Cliff, so the Japanese positions there could fire on the approaching LVTs, but not on the men on the beaches. However, Chinito Cliff was a natural strongpoint. Using flamethrowers and assisted by tanks of Company C, 3rd Tank Battalion, that fired directly into the entrances of caves, the 3rd Battalion managed to capture Chinito Cliff by noon and then cleared Adelip Point. 76. In the center, the 1st Battalion was confronted by Bunchu Ridge, named after the commander of Company A, Captain Geary R. Bunchu, who had been tasked with its capture. The ridge was a rocky outcrop covered with vegetation 400 yards, 370 m, high and 200 yards, 180 m square. By 10:45, Bunchu had made it to within 100 yards, 91 m of the ridge top, but his men were pinned down by mortar and machine gun fire. Bunchu was wounded, and more than half of his men were killed or wounded. Hall ordered his 81 mortars to concentrate on the ridge and ordered Bunchu to make a second attempt at capturing the ridge before nightfall. Hall later denied ordering a frontal assault, but others recalled differently. Aided by the 40 guns of the 14th Defense Battalion, Company A reached the crest, but could not hold it, and Bunchu was killed in the attempt. 77-78. In the meantime, the 12th Marines, the 3rd Marine Division's artillery regiment, began landing at 12:15, and all its 75 and 105 howitzers were ashore by 16:40, but the range was too short to provide supporting fire on W Day. The 21st Marines landed on Green Beach and was on its first objective, a moderate height behind the village of Asan, by mid-morning and advanced up the Asan River Valley. It encountered less opposition than the other regiments, but was confronted by steep and rugged cliffs covered in scrub and tangled vines. On the right, the 9th Marines landed on Blue Beach, captured Asan Point and crossed the Nijul River. The day's action cost the 3rd Marine Division 105 killed, 536 wounded and 56 missing. 77-79. Asan Beach an hour and a half after the first landings. A field dressing station is in operation. Note LVTs and M4 tanks. Asan Beach an hour and a half after the first landings. A field dressing station is in operation. Note LVTs and M4 tanks. Asan's green and blue beaches stretch from Asan Town, left center, to Asan Point, lower right. Asan's green and blue beaches stretch from Asan Town, left center, to Asan Point, lower right. Seen on the northern beaches near Asan Point, 21 July 1944, with 2 LSDs unloading. Seen on the northern beaches near Asan Point, 21 July 1944, with 2 LSDs unloading. Consolidation and counterattacks. During the first night, Shigematsu attempted to drive the Marines off the high ground they held using the 2nd Battalion, 18th Infantry Regiment, and the 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the 10th Mixed Regiment. Although they inflicted heavy casualties on the Marines, they could not break the American lines. Early the next morning, the 319th and 320th Independent Infantry Battalions attempted to recover Adelip Point and Chinito Cliff, but were unsuccessful. The counterattacks disrupted American plans on the left, and efforts to gain Bunchu Ridge failed. The 3rd Marine Division fared better on the right, where the 9th Marines overran the villages of Tepungan and Pidi and occupied the ruins of Pidi Naval Yard. At 14:25, the 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines, landed on Cabras Island, using LVTs to avoid the mined causeway. The island was not occupied, but was liberally sown with land mines. 80. During the night of 22-23 July, the 321st Independent Infantry Battalion launched a counterattack against the 21st Marines. By morning, only about 50 men remained of what had been a 488-strong battalion. The Marines had also lost heavily, and in the counterattack and the fighting on Bunchu Ridge, the 3rd Marines had lost 615 men. Turnage resolved to make another all-out assault on Bunchu Ridge on 23 July. Every available weapon pounded the ridge, but when the attack was made, they discovered most of the Japanese defenders had withdrawn. The 3rd Marines secured the ridge and spent the rest of the day dealing with isolated nests of riflemen and machine gunners. The locus of the Japanese defense was now the Mount Tenjo Road. In American hands, it could allow tanks to move up to the Font Plateau. 2 battalions of the 21st Marines attacked up a ravine between the 3rd and 21st Marines, only to encounter a hail of machine gun fire from the cliffs overhead. An air strike was called in, but the Marines' positions were too close to the bomb line, and 17 Marines were killed or wounded. 81-82. Oerlikon 20 Cannon of Battery I, 14th Defense Battalion, emplaced atop Chinido Cliff to support the advance. Oerlikon 20 Cannon of Battery I, 14th Defense Battalion, emplaced atop Chinido Cliff to support the advance. Mortarmen lay down a barrage. Mortarmen lay down a barrage. Japanese dead. Japanese dead. On 25 July, Takashima launched a coordinated counterattack against the American positions. 83, the 3rd Battalion, 18th Infantry Regiment, attacked a 25-man detachment of the 3rd Division Reconnaissance Company tasked with holding the gap between the 9th and 21 Marines. The unit was too small for the task, and after a firefight in which 4 men were killed and 5 wounded, the detachment withdrew to the lines of Company B, 9th Marines. Instead of moving through the gap it had created, the 3rd Battalion, 18th Infantry Regiment, continued to probe the Marines' positions, putting the 21st Marines under great pressure. Infiltrators extended the fighting into the 3rd Marine Division's rear areas, including around the hospital, where the 3rd Medical Battalion killed 33 Japanese soldiers at a cost of 3 killed and 20 wounded, 2 of whom later died of their wounds. 84, between 25 and 27 July, the 3rd Marine Division lost 166 killed, 645 wounded and 34 missing, mostly in the Japanese counterattack. 85. The counterattack cost the Japanese about 3,500 men. 3 battalions were virtually destroyed. During the assault by the 54th Keibutai, Captain Yutaka Sugimoto was killed by artillery fire. 84. The 18th Infantry Regiment lost its commander, Colonel Hikoshiro Ohashi, and the commanders of its 2nd and 3rd Battalions, Majors Chusha Maruyama and Setsuo Yukioka, respectively. Lieutenant Colonel Akiro Kadoka, the commander of the 10th Independent Mixed Regiment, was also killed. 85. Major General Kiyoshi Shigematsu, the commander of the 48th Mixed Brigade, was killed on 26 July when tanks attacked his command post on Mount Mangan. 84. Obata reported to Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo. On the night of the 25th, the Army, with its entire force, launched the general attack from Font and Mount Mangan toward Adelep Point. Commanding officers and all officers and men boldly charged the enemy. The fighting continued until dawn, but our force failed to achieve the desired objectives, losing more than 80% of the personnel, for which I sincerely apologize. I will defend Mount Mangan to the last by assembling the remaining strength. I feel deeply sympathetic for the officers and men who fell in action and their bereaved families. 86-87. Takashima now decided to change tactics. Since it was clearly impossible to defeat the American forces on Guam, he decided to retreat to the interior of the island and conduct a campaign of attrition. 87. He withdrew his troops from southern Guam, planning to make a stand in the mountainous central and northern part of the island, to engage in delaying action in the jungle in northern Guam to hold the island as long as possible. 86, but before he could evacuate his command post, he was killed by machine gun fire. Leaving Obata in command, 88, on 27 July, the 3rd Marine Division launched an all-out assault on Font Plateau. The Japanese defenders made good use of the terrain, fighting from a network of bunkers, caves, and trenches, inflicting more than 100 casualties on the Marines in 3 days of bitter fighting before the plateau was taken. 89, meanwhile, the 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines, fought their way to the top of Mount Chachow, annihilating a Japanese company left there as a rearguard. As they did so, they saw American troops on Mount Tenjo. This was the 77th Infantry Division. That afternoon, the soldiers made contact with the Marines, and the two beachheads were joined. 90. Southern Beachhead. W-Day at Agate. Southern Beach Sketch. Scheme of Maneuver, Agate Beachhead. In the south, the 4th Marines landed on White Beaches 1 and 2, north of Bangui Point, while the 22nd Marines landed on Yellow Beaches 1 and 2 to the north. 91. Intense Japanese fire commenced when the first wave of the 22nd Marines was about 100 yards, 91 m from the beach. The leading waves reported 10 LVT, AS and LVTs destroyed by Japanese fire during the landing. Another 15 were lost on W-Day due to Japanese fire, damage from the coral reef and mechanical trouble. 75. The aid station party of the 1st Battalion, 22nd Marines, took a direct hit from a Japanese 75 Enfilade gun, killing or injuring the entire party and destroying most of the medical supplies. This left the unit without a doctor and short of corpsmen and stretcher bearers until the afternoon, 92-93. While the initial Japanese reaction was stronger than at Asan, 92, the terrain was more favorable to the attackers, the ground beyond the beaches consisting of low hills and open ground suitable for tanks to operate. 94-95. Despite numerous pillboxes, the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade made good progress. The 4th Marines cleared Bangui Point and Hill 40, while the 22nd Marines took Agate, which had been reduced to rubble by the preliminary bombardment, but was still staunchly defended. 94. The elevations in the 22nd Marines area were so low they were not marked on the contour map. One such 10 to 20 foot 3 to 6.1 m, rise about 100 yards, 91 m, from the beach was defended by Japanese troops dug in on the reverse slope, but they only briefly delayed the 2nd Battalion, 22nd Marines, 95. The 2nd Battalion, 305th Infantry, boarded LCVPs at 10:30 but then circled aimlessly until 14:05 when the order to land was received. The 77th Infantry Division had no LVTs and the LCVPs grounded on the reef. No LVTs were available, so they had to wade ashore through waist-deep water, occasionally falling into deep potholes. The regimental commander, Colonel Vincent J. Tanzola, received the order to land the rest of the regiment at 15:30. Only enough LCVPs were available, so he loaded the 1st Battalion and sent it off. However, the naval officers did not permit it to land until they received an order from Shepard at 17:30. Once again, the soldiers had to make their way from the reef on foot, but by now the tide was coming in. The 3rd Battalion had to wait for the LCVPs to return, but in the meantime a report of a Japanese submarine caused the transports to put to sea. Their ship, USS Alpine, returned at 21:10 and the troops moved ashore from the reef in 5 LVTs borrowed from the Marines. Meanwhile, Tanzola paddled ashore in a rubber raft he found on the reef. 96-97. Agate Invasion Beach, 21 July 1944. By nightfall, the Marines and soldiers had established beachheads about 1,300 to 2,300 yards, 1,200 to 2,100 m deep. 94. The brigade command post opened 200 yards, 180 m, southeast of Gon Point at 1350, and Shepard assumed command ashore. 98. He organized a defense in depth against the Japanese counterattack he was certain would come during the night. 94. Both the brigade's pack howitzer battalions were in position and registered before dark, having been brought ashore by ducks. The ducks were then used to fetch ammunition. One battery of the 305th Field Artillery arrived after dark. 97 at 18:30, Shepard reported to Jiger. Own casualties about 350. Enemy unknown. Critical shortages fuel and ammunition all types. Think we can handle it. Will continue as planned tomorrow. 99. Supply was difficult. Landing ships could not come closer than the reef, several hundred yards from the beach, and the loss of 24 LVTs was sorely felt. A layer of silt on the shore side of the reef caused ducks and LVTs to become bogged. Rubber raft causeways and ships' life rafts were used as expedients to get the needed supplies ashore. 92 cranes were used to shift supplies in cargo nets from landing craft to the LVTs and ducks. Unlike the northern beaches, where some cranes were set up on the reef, all the cranes on the southern beaches had to be barge-mounted, with cargo transferred in deep water. The Navy assisted by continuing unloading operations through the night. 101. About one-fifth of the total strength of III Amphibious Corps was engaged in unloading activities. The 1st Provisional Marine Brigade had 1,070 men on board ship and 1,800 on the reef and beaches engaged in unloading work. The 77th Infantry Division, with 3 battalions of shore party engineers and 270 garrison troops with low landing priorities, had 583 soldiers unloading ships and 1,828 working ashore. 98 potential supply dump locations identified beforehand from aerial photos were often found to be rice paddies, which were unsuitable. 102. 155 guns of a battery, 7th 155 gun Battalion, are set up 500 yards in from White Beach 2. The expected counterattack was not long in coming. The focal point of the Japanese attack by the 3rd Battalion, 38th Infantry Regiment, was Hill 40. Company K, 4th Marines, was twice driven off the hill but rallied and retook it. During the night, small groups of infiltrators armed with demolition charges made their way toward the beaches. Some were intercepted by sentries of the 305th Infantry, but others made it to the beach road, where they disabled 2 weapons carriers and 3 LVTs before being killed. A platoon from the 5th Field Depot killed 14 before they could get to the brigade ammunition dump, and the 4th Tank Company killed 23 around its service park. Some also reached the lines of the field artillery, which had to alternate fire missions with fighting infiltrators. Around 02:30, a column of Japanese tanks engaged Company B, 4th Marines. 2 were destroyed by a bazooka team before the gunner was killed, and the others were knocked out by hastily summoned Sherman tanks. 103-104. During the night, the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade lost about 50 killed and twice as many wounded. About 600 Japanese bodies were counted. The 38th Infantry Regiment was almost completely destroyed. 105. Among the dead was its commander, Colonel Tsunetaro Tsunaga. 106. Its 2nd Battalion, which was still intact, retreated to the Orote Peninsula. About 300 survivors of the rest of the regiment gathered northeast of Mount Alafin, where they were ordered to head to Ordot, the assembly point for reserves. 105. Cutting off the Orote Peninsula. Southern Beachhead, 21-25 July. On 22 July, Shepard ordered his units to expand the beachhead in all directions. Opposition was light, with the soldiers and Marines having more difficulty with the terrain. A patrol from the 4th Marines was able to reach the summit of Mount Alafin and found it unoccupied. Meanwhile, the 22nd Marines reached the Ayuja River to find the road bridge had been destroyed. They were reluctant to cross without armored support, and the tanks found the banks too steep to scale. LVT-AS were therefore called upon. By mid-morning, two-thirds of the 155 guns and howitzers of the III Amphibious Corps Artillery were ashore, and the anti-aircraft guns of the 9th Defense Battalion were in place, as were the 4 battalions of the 77th Division Artillery by late afternoon. 107. Shepard and Bruce intended to relieve the 4th Marines with the 306th Infantry, so the former could participate in the assault on the Arot Peninsula, but no LVTs or ducks were available to bring them ashore, as all the available transport was being used to fetch supplies and artillery pieces. Snyder recommended the men come in around the noon half-tide, when the water was waist-deep, although this precluded an early relief of the Marines. The 3rd Battalion, 306th Infantry, began coming ashore at 11:30 on 23 July, followed by the rest of the regiment in the afternoon. 108. Most of the radio sets were ruined by contact with salt water. Many vehicles drowned and had to be dragged ashore by bulldozers, and a tank disappeared into a large shell hole. At 08:00 on 24 July, the 77th Infantry Division assumed responsibility for the defense of the beachhead east of the Old Agate Road. Its 3rd Regiment, the 307th Infantry, started wadding ashore at 13:00 in heavy swells whipped up by a storm out to sea. 109-110. Smoldering Japanese tanks knocked out on the Agatsume Road by U.S. medium tanks. A tank dozer and tank crews of the 22nd Tank Company with picks and shovels constructed a causeway over the Iuja River, allowing tanks to cross. But when the 22nd Marines attempted to advance across the rice paddies at the base of the Arot Peninsula on 23 July, they were pinned down under mortar and small arms fire. Tanks became bogged in the soft mud of the rice paddies, but when they tried to use the road, one was disabled by 37 anti-tank gun fire and another by a mine. 111-112. The attack was resumed at 10:00 the next day after an intense aerial, artillery, and naval bombardment. 5 Japanese tanks attempted to counterattack, but they were engaged and knocked out by Shermans. Another 3 Japanese tanks were destroyed by fighter bombers. The Shermans turned their guns on Japanese concrete emplacements and coconut bunkers. Concealed Japanese guns on the Arot Peninsula cliffs near Ney Island were engaged by USS LCI G-366 and LCI G-429. 5 sailors were killed and 26 wounded from their crews before the Japanese guns were silenced. In the afternoon, the 22nd Marines overran a series of abandoned dumps and positions and took the village of Atentano, thereby cutting off the Arot Peninsula. 113-110. The cost of the first day's fighting in the southern beachhead was high, but not nearly as high as in the north. Between 21 and 24 July inclusive, the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade lost 188 killed, 728 wounded, and 87 missing, while the 77th Infantry Division had lost 24 killed, 63 wounded, and 1 missing. 114. Clearing the Arot Peninsula. A 155-gun M1 on White Beach of the III Amphibious Corps Artillery fires. With the death of Tsunaga, Commander Asachi Tamai of the 263rd Air Group became the senior officer in charge on the Arot Peninsula. On the night of 25 July, the 2nd Battalion, 38th Infantry Regiment, counterattacked as part of the general counteroffensive of the 29th Division. A banzai charge against Company L, 22nd Marines, and a platoon of the 4th Marines was met by the Marines calling down the combined artillery fire of the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade, the III Amphibious Corps, and the 77th Infantry Division. The Japanese troops who made it through the barrage and enfilading machine gun fire died in close combat. By morning, 26,000 artillery rounds had been fired, and over 400 Japanese soldiers lay dead around the Marines' positions. This ended the 2nd Battalion, 38th Infantry Regiment as a fighting force, and the primary responsibility for the defense of the Arot Peninsula now fell on the naval troops, particularly the 54th K Battalion, 115. Over the next 4 days, the 4th and 22nd Marines, supported by Marine and Army tanks, cleared the Arot Peninsula, which was defended by improvised minefields made from aerial bombs covered by gun emplacements, and defilating mortar and machine gun fire from camouflaged bunkers and strongpoints made from concrete and coconut logs. Around 16:00 on 29 July, 2 platoons with tanks reached Arot Point, where they killed 2 Japanese soldiers. On receiving their report, Shepard declared the peninsula secured. Many of the Japanese defenders who remained on the peninsula committed suicide when U.S. troops approached. Others tried to swim to the harbor, but were killed or captured by a waiting LVT-A platoon. Securing the Arot Peninsula cost the Marines 115 killed, 721 wounded and 38 missing, 116. As many as 2,500 Japanese had died in the process, 117. Marines raised the American flag over the Marine barracks. At 15:30 on 29 July, the American flag was raised over the Marine barracks on Guam once more in a formal ceremony attended by Spruance, Smith, Geiger, Larson, and Shepard. 116 Shepard declared. On this hallowed ground, you officers and men of the 1st Marine Brigade have avenged the loss of our comrades who were overcome by a numerically superior enemy 3 days after Pearl Harbor. Under our flag, this island again stands ready to fulfill its destiny as an American fortress in the Pacific. 118. The following day, a Navy Grumman TBF Avenger from the escort carrier USS Chenango made a test landing on the airstrip, which had been hastily repaired by the 2nd Marine Separate Engineer Battalion. The escort carriers USS Sangamon and Swanee then each launched 2 observation aircraft from VMO-1, which henceforth operated from the airstrip, along with Army observation aircraft. 116. Final operations. Between 28 July and 2 August, the 77th Infantry Division's 77th Reconnaissance Troop sent out a series of 5-man patrols, each accompanied by a Chamorro guide, to determine what Japanese units remained in the southern part of the island. The dense jungle made aerial reconnaissance unreliable. The patrol reports, and those from Chamorro civilians, indicated what Geiger already suspected. The main body of the Japanese forces had retreated to the north, and there were no significant enemy units in the south. 119 Obata had decided to make his last stand on Mount Santa Rosa. 120, on 31 July. Geiger started an offensive north with the 3rd Marine Division on the left and the 77th Infantry Division on the right. 121. The 3rd Marines liberated Agana that day. 122. The uncompleted Tian airfield was captured on 1 August. 123. A Marine tractor, loaded with ammunition and water, follows Marines along a road leading to the front lines. A Marine tractor, loaded with ammunition and water, follows Marines along a road leading to the front lines. Company B, 305th Infantry, moving out from the high ground. Company B, 305th Infantry, moving out from the high ground. Burning U.S. tanks in Yigo. Burning U.S. tanks in Yigo. Rain and thick jungle made conditions difficult for the Americans, but after an engagement with the main Japanese line of defense around Mount Barrigada from 2 to 4 August, the Japanese line collapsed. 124. The 1st Provisional Brigade formed up on the left flank of the 3rd Marine Division on 7 August because of the widening front and continued casualties. In an effort to prevent the Japanese from slipping through gaps in the line, 125. That day the 307th Infantry clashed with 2 tanks that held up the capture of the village of Yigo, but only for a few hours. 126. The following day, it captured the Japanese stronghold at Mount Santa Rosa. 126-127. On 10 August, Jiger declared all organized Japanese resistance had ended. 128. Not everyone heard the message. That day, the 1st Battalion, 306th Infantry, encountered cave positions at Mount Mataguac, and in the ensuing clash, lost 8 dead and 17 wounded before withdrawing for the night. 128. The caves contained Obata's headquarters. In his final message to Imperial General Headquarters, he reported, "I accepted the important post of the Army Commander, and although I exerted all-out effort, the fortune of war has not been with me. The fighting has not been in our favor since the loss of Saipan. We are continuing a desperate battle on Guam. Officers and men have been lost, weapons have been destroyed, and ammunition has been expended. We have only our bare hands to fight with. The holding of Guam has become hopeless. I will engage the enemy in the last battle with the remaining strength at Mount Mataguac tomorrow, the 11th. My only fear is that report of death with honor, annihilation, at Guam might shock the Japanese people at home. Our souls will defend the island to the very end. We pray for the security of the empire. I am overwhelmed with sorrow for the families of the many fallen officers and men. I request that measures be taken for government assistance to them." 128. The next morning, the 1st Battalion, 306th Infantry, returned with tanks and used Bangalore torpedoes and TNT to seal the caves. During the fight, Obata committed suicide. 128. Aftermath. Japanese holdouts. By 12 August 1944, the number of Japanese dead in the fighting was estimated at 11,340. Since there were 18,500 Japanese troops on Guam on 21 July 129, it followed as many as 10,000 remained at large, assuming errors counting the dead. 130. The last surviving general officer, Major General Yoshitomo Tamura, the Chief of Staff of the 31st Army, committed suicide on 22 August. With his death, the ranking Japanese officer on Guam became Lieutenant Colonel Hideyuki Takeda, the operations officer of the 29th Division. In July 1945, the Island Command reported 7,831 Japanese had been killed and 1,026 taken prisoner since 10 August 1944. 129. By the end of August 1945, 18,377 Japanese dead were counted, and 1,250 had been captured. 131. A landing craft tank brings 221 Japanese prisoners of war to a Coast Guardman troop transport for transfer to Pearl Harbor. As time went by, the condition of the Japanese holdouts became ever more desperate. Most had no weapons, and the few who did had little ammunition. Food became their main concern. On 11 June 1945, Major Seihachi Sato surrendered himself and his 34 men. After Japan surrendered, leaflets were dropped with an order to surrender signed by Sato. On 27 August, 63 Japanese surrendered near Mount Barragata. Sato met with Takeda 4 days later and arranged for him to surrender. He came in on 4 September, along with 67 of his men. Another 46 surrendered in the Tarag area on Takeda's orders. The last organized group was one of survivors of the 18th Infantry Regiment led by Lieutenant Yasuhiro Yamashita, who surrendered on 12 September, 130-131. In January 1946, the Island Command reported 1,550 Japanese had been taken prisoner since Japan's surrender. On 8 December 1945, 3 Marines were ambushed and killed. Another was killed 6 days later. To deal with holdouts, the Guam Police Combat Patrol was formed in November 1944. By the time it was wound up at the end of 1948, it had captured 5 Japanese and killed 117. A few months later, Private Shidro Arimoto surrendered. Another 8 holdouts were captured in September 1951. Sergeant Masashi Ito surrendered on 23 May 1960, after the last of his companions was captured. On 24 January 1972, Sergeant Shoichi Yake was discovered by hunters on the island. He had lived alone in a cave for 28 years near Talifofo Falls. 133. American casualties. Marine casualties on Guam, including naval personnel assigned to Marine units. Up to 10 August 1944, amounted to 1,190 killed, and 377 died of wounds, and 5,308 wounded in action. Army casualties for the same period were 177 dead and 662 wounded. Naval units on Guam lost 3 killed and 15 wounded, 134, and ships lost 13 killed and 27 wounded, 135. An estimated 600 civilians also died, 136.